19th. This is the beginning of what we're calling season 3 for this podcast.
Yeah, we've come a long way.
Yeah, amazing. Well done.
Oh, thank you. So I wanted to start the season with sort of going back to the roots of the podcast and talk about evolutionary health, evolutionary diet, understanding how we have been formed to live the way we live, and how our modern diets don't exactly copy.
Moving past what we've already discussed about that we're built to gorge and then not eat for long periods of time.
Right. All of these things.
Yeah.
And thinking about those things, but getting into some real specifics of the science. And particularly, I wanted to talk about the advantages of low carbohydrates. I wanted to talk about the advantages of high fiber, and I wanted to talk about how these things relate to things like anti-aging, how we can keep ourselves young, anti-inflammation in general, fighting cancer, and finally, how to deal with irritable bowel syndrome and other things like that are directly related to our modern diets.
Wow. All right. Well, this sounds fascinating. Half of this is me, so yeah.
So trying to hit some of these hot topics.
Yeah, all right.
We, as hunter-gatherers, clearly did not evolve to eat cheeseburgers, right? We had a really...
It feels low. It tastes like we did evolve to eat cheeseburgers.
We more like just evolved to eat like roadkill that we then like stuck on a stick and roasted a little bit, but not a cheeseburger. So, what is the difference between roadkill on a stick and a cheeseburger? It's the fats, it's the kinds of fats. Something that's been living free range before it got hit by the car is going to have a lot more unsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats. It's even going to have omega-3s. It's going to have those things that are easily digested, don't tend to lead to inflammation, and have been associated with fighting colon cancer. So anything that is raised in a factory where you have basically a conveyor belt of corn coming to the cow who just stands there, that cow is going to get really, really fat with the worst kinds of fat. So lots of saturated fats, all the things that, while they might taste good and feel good in our mouths, they have a perfect melting point that really is perfect. Just a quick aside, we like things that melt at almost exactly our body temperature, but a little bit below. So butter, chocolate, saturated fats, all of these things have in common that at body temperature, they're melting. And so in our mouth, they feel cool and they just give you a really nice sensation. And somehow we've evolved to seek these things out. They're very high energy, and they're what our, ancestors must have thought of as like the perfect foods, things,
that didn't require much work.
Didn't require work,
good stuff.
and the maximum possible calories in the smallest package. And so, we were looking for these things.
I remember my kids sitting on the counter as I'm buttering their toast, and all they wanted was the butter.
Absolutely. So we love all the macronutrients. There's only 3. There's the carbohydrates, there's the fats, and there's the protein. Right? That's food.
Yeah.
And we like all of them, but we like the worst forms of all 3, right? So we like the most saturated fats. We like the sugariest sugar. We don't want it, mixed or slow or bound into some other molecule that we don't taste.
No, I want it
from.
Immediately available now. And
we like our protein degraded in somehow, cooked or dried in the sun, or something that brings out a lot of glutamate,
or both.
Yeah, so you want that savory flavor, the umami.
Cook it. Yeah.
So we're looking for umami. We're not just looking for protein. We're looking for umami. Just like we're not just looking for carbohydrates. We're looking for sugar. And so all of these things.
Does the umami signal what the body needs in the same way that sugar does? I mean, sugar means, you're getting energy now.
Yes, umami is the one. It's the one amino acid that we can both taste and actually goes through the brain-blood barrier. It's also the number one stimulatory neurotransmitter. It's glutamate. Monosodium glutamate, the monosodium, the sodium goes away, and you're left with this ionic form of an amino acid that directly affects neurons and directly affects your brain.
So it's beyond my control that I go.
It's so good. Yeah, no, it's just like the sugar, and it's something that's going to stimulate dopamine response that you found the thing you're looking for, just like the sugar does. So all three of these things, the macronutrients, are our food, but we have key aspects of them that we're triggered to respond to: the sugar, the glutamate, the umami. And those saturated fats that melt at perfect body temperature, which will also make us want coconut oil and chocolate. The cocoa butter and chocolate melts at exactly that temperature.
This must have something to do with the sensation of eating something like a Kobe beef or one of those.
Something that
this in your
the
mouth.
Fattier the things are, the more amazing they feel in our mouths.
Yeah.
Plus, they carry the flavor with them. Wunfi's mom used to say, put some fat in it, it'll make it more tasty. And the fat didn't change the flavor, but it carried the flavor.
Yeah.
So these are the things that we're seeking out evolutionarily. But they're not necessarily good to have in the amounts that we can now get them. So that cow sitting on the conveyor belt eating corn isn't just getting fat, but it's getting worse kinds of fat, and it's having a higher percentage of them. So if you make a hamburger out of that cow and a hamburger out of a cow that's just been eating grass, even if they weigh the same, they're going to be very, very different hamburgers. They're going to
and I'm going to prefer the one that was just eating corn.
Exactly.
That's the one that I want to eat.
It's going to have so much more fat in it. It's going to satisfy you in a way that the lean one doesn't.
Highly expensive grass-fed meat, and one time I buy it, I'm like, wait, no, this is a different.
Yeah, no, I cooked grass-fed meat last night for my kids. And first of all, I started off with about a half cup of vegetable oil. No, vegetable oil is better for you than saturated beef fat, so I was happy about that. But there was no way that it could just sit there and fry in its own juices because it had none.
No juices.
It was just bright red meat with no fat. Then I just kept putting in more and more and more spices. So I put in the soy sauce and vinegar and I put in peppers and garlic and every kind of pepper I could think on, Szechuan peppers, and
you've already left most of the rest of us behind. But yes,
and I was, because I needed to equal the meat flavor because the meat flavor was so intense.
Yep.
So yes, exactly. It is sometimes difficult to work with it,
and the mouthfeel of that product of what comes from that animal is entirely different, and it's different than what I thought it was different than what I was acclimated to growing up. But what you're saying is, no, this is an evolutionary desire.
Well, yeah, because we want the sweet fat as we might put it. If you think about the saying, sit around and chew the fat, you don't have to sit around and chew fat. Sit around and chew the fat is when you've just killed something with a spear and its fatty parts are all to its gristly parts.
Right.
And so you sit around and chew it.
That's what you get at first.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're evolutionarily sort of dedicated to seeking out the worst possible things out there, and specifically avoiding the things that are best for us. So this is something I think I've brought up before. It's certainly a theme when I think about diet, as fiber is the sort of one magic bullet we have in our diet, that it makes everything better in every way. It swells up so you feel full more quickly. It blocks the digestion in the intestines, so you don't actually get as many calories out of the food. It speeds up throughput, so you're sending that food through faster and not keeping it in there. It has that means your food has less time to cause problems as it's sitting there in your intestine. It's not going to fester. It's less likely to have cancerous causing interactions and the things that can happen from oxidation of fats and carbohydrates. It's actually going to bond to sugars so that there's less sugar at any given moment entering your body, so you have less of a glycemic reaction. The insulin levels stay lower, and it's going to cause it to be released more slowly, but it's also going to catch that sugar and make it pass out of your body, so you never even get it. So in every way, it's helping you like that.
Does it not also feed the fauna that we have?
Yeah, and that's something that I was going to get to, and some really specific ways that I wanted to talk about.
The one thing I can say is, a while ago I added fiber to my diet, just powdered fiber supplements, and it's changed my skin. I can say that for sure.
Yeah, and again, the fiber is what we specifically decided to avoid, even it's the thing we want most. So the Romans figured out how to make...
The thing we need most, not the thing we want most.
The thing we need most.
Yeah.
The Romans figured out how to make white flour. Why did they make white flour? 2 reasons.
Yum.
Okay, 3 reasons. Yum. Sorry. And we liked it when it happened, but it was appealing to our senses. Bright white color and a nice flavor. But part of the nice flavor is there's these polyunsaturated fats in small amounts in the wheat germ, in the embryo where it's going to actually develop. That's the part we remove, is the developing embryo, where the protein and these polyunsaturated fats, the best part for us. All the nutrients. But those things go bad. Particularly those polyunsaturated fats, they start to oxidize and you get that musty flavor. And so you don't like that. So if you want to store something long term, you get rid of that. And the other thing is rats will eat it. Rats don't like white flour. There's no nutrition in it. They will eat it if there's nothing else there. But compared to a whole grain wheat that has all of these fats and proteins that they need to live, they're going to seek out the whole grains. So we made something that was... essentially anti-rat, and also made a beautiful white loaf that was very, very tasty. But now we have something that has no fiber in it. It's almost pure carbohydrate, and it goes into our stomachs, and bad things start to happen. And I wanted to talk about this in the concept of the microbiome in particular, because I've been realizing that the microbiome isn't just that we have things living in us. It's more like we have an organ that is a major portion of our body and our body's health that is inside us, is part of us, but we have this sort of slow interaction with it, so that our microbiome resembles the microbiome of the people around us because we're exchanging bacteria with them. At the DNA level of the bacteria, the strains are going to resemble each other because they're the particular strains. They'll actually start exchanging DNA between bacteria. Bacteria can do lateral gene transfer. So they don't need to even be the same species of gene. So an E. coli in your gut could be talking to a Bacillus cereus in your gut and exchange genes between them. This is how antibiotic resistance happens. And so people who have become antibiotic resistant will then share not just the bacteria that might be resistant, the bad ones, but the good ones will start picking up that resistance as well, and they'll share that, so that we can share. The microbiome genes are spreading through populations, even if it's not the specific strains of bacteria. And this can be bad or it can be good.
It could be anything.
It could be anything, exactly. So you have to think about how your microbiome works. I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast before, but I love to tell my students about people in Japan are able to digest some of the carbohydrates in seaweed that are essentially indigestible by any life on land. Nothing has the enzymes to digest these particular carbohydrates that seaweeds make. This is why we make agar plates. Agar plates are a carbohydrate derived from seaweed, discovered by the Indonesians making agar. But of course, Western scientists basically just stole it. It was literally their Indonesian cook was making agar. And the wife brought it to the scientist and said, "You're looking for something Jell-O that doesn't dissolve. What about this stuff?" And he's like, "Oh, this is great."
It's the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Agar is agar. So our agar plates are coming from this
not flavored.
Yeah. It's coming from this stuff that the problem was several bacteria on land eat Jell-O, and that's actually an interesting test for them. So you start off with an agar plate, or a gelatin plate, but if you turn it over, which is what you do when you're incubating plates, the whole thing just pours out as soup because all the bonds, the thing that makes Jell-O solid is these tangled proteins. Once those all get sliced by an enzyme, there's no tangle anymore and it turns to liquid. So agar is designed so that no bacteria can dissolve it.
Slice it up.
And so you put E. coli from a human on it, and the E. coli can grow on whatever nutrients you put on the agar, but it doesn't slice it up, so it doesn't turn into jelly. It doesn't turn into soup. And it stays in the plate. And so, it's nice to work with that way. There are populations in Japan, I think most of the population of Japan has E. coli that can digest agar, these marine carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And what happened was probably around 10, 20,000 years ago, someone in Japan ate some raw seaweed that had marine bacteria that were able to digest seaweed because they live in the ocean and something has to. And when they ate that seaweed, the bacteria lived just long enough to send that enzymatic gene into the E. coli. Now, that bacterium was evolved to live in the ocean. It couldn't survive very long, but it lived just long enough that it exchanged this information. And then they had E. coli living in their guts that could digest these complex carbohydrates.
This is like a science fiction movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Lateral gene transfer is wacky, wacky stuff. And then their E. coli, because this was adaptive, because they had a lot of seaweed in their diet, passed it on through generations. So they've now had this for tens of thousands of years that other populations don't seem to have. There are probably other ones out there. This has probably happened more than once. It must have happened more than once. It must happen relatively frequently, but particularly in microbiomes. And we know it's happening in our microbiomes in relation to antibiotic resistance. We take antibiotics to kill, let's say, streptococcus for strep throat, and then we have it living in the rest of our bacteria. Even if they didn't develop it on their own through evolution, they're just trading it back and forth. Now, the longer we stay away from antibiotics, the more likely they are to evolve away from it, just lose that gene. I'm sure if for, say, the next 5,000 years, a population from Japan stopped eating seaweed, they would lose that gene that is able to digest it. Yeah, exactly.
Eventually, it just goes away. It just gets lost.
Yeah.
It's just because it doesn't need. It's not neat.
It's an expense that E. coli doesn't need to put up with. So this is something we have to keep in mind when we're talking about our microbiomes and how we keep them healthy. Is the microbiome of everyone around us. And how they're keeping theirs healthy as well, because it's not just obviously the genomes, but it's the strains, what genes are being expressed. So if you have E. coli in the lab, for the first 3 days or so, it behaves like textbook E. coli. But after about a week, it does weird things. It digests things that E. coli can't digest, stops digesting things that E. coli does digest.
Because it's been separated.
Because it's been sitting there and... People call it senescent, but it is far from senescent. It's still perfectly alive. It just doesn't behave the way E. coli is supposed to behave.
Why does it change?
Why does it change? It's probably eaten a bunch of the food it had available at the beginning. That food is now gone. It ate that. Now it has different foods. So it has to switch its enzymes to start now digesting proteins instead of just carbohydrates. Or it maybe went to more complex carbohydrates rather than sugar. If there's sugar available for E. coli, like glucose or sucrose, which it can easily turn into glucose and fructose, it's never going to eat lactose. But if there's no sugar, it'll actually turn on enzymes to start eating lactose. So
How crafty.
Yeah, no, bacteria are very, very adaptable that way. And they will change in response to your diet in real time, in matters of hours.
I mean, I guess we have all life on Earth to thank for this property. Like, if they didn't do this, they wouldn't have survived.
Right, but we tend to think of it as just some bugs living inside us, but it's not. It's not that. It is, again, much more like an organ.
You mean the biome itself, as if Earth were Gaia? Biome is an entity within us as
yes.
Working as one.
Yeah. So like the people who would think of Earth as Gaia,
right?
You should think of your little microbiome as a Gaia, sort of.
Right, within you. Yeah.
A little organ that is doing things in a really concerted way. So
and how do we we recognize what is the manifestation of these interactions with this thing that's very hard to suss out what it is exactly?
Well, every neurotransmitter in your brain is also made in your stomach.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
All of them. All of them.
Well, there's a direct connection.
These neurotransmitters are directly affected by the bacteria in your stomach. They tell the bacteria what to do, and the bacteria make also neurotransmitters to tell you what to do. The direct connection is between what the bacteria are doing and your vagus nerve. So your vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve coming out of your nerve X, which I love the idea for the 10, coming out and spreading basically all over your body.
Right. Yeah. Like from your ears.
Exactly. Yeah. The tops of the ears,
your eyebrows, all the way down.
And it's related to everything from digestion to like sexual response.
Yeah.
It's like the reason why it's nice to have the top of your ear rubbed.
Yeah.
These things are directly related to the way our body functions, and then they talk to the brain. So some people, when they're looking at things like ADHD or autism, have been able to do studies looking at probiotics that actually change the level of neurotransmitters in the brain and can change the way things are affected.
Wonderful, yes.
So these are at the margins. This is not the genetic difference between people who might have a particular condition or another, but these are ways where we can see how our modern diets and our modern ways of living, where we've selected for things that eat lots and lots of sugar with no fiber on it, could also be explaining some of the rise of things like autism and ADHD and others of these things.
Well, I would love if you spoke more at another time on prebiotics and probiotics and enzymes and things like that, because I have found a major help in my life by finding the proper probiotics and putting them in there on a regular basis.
Back to it. The problem is there's not a huge it's like cooking, okay? Cooking is science, but you can't just be a scientist if you're going to cook.
Right.
Each time is just once.
Well, it's like being a doctor.
It's like being no, absolutely. Yeah. There's absolutely an art to it. So that every time someone eats or every time a doctor treats someone, that's an anecdotal thing. It's not a study. And so you can't tell exactly what happened because you don't have two of them. And you never will. And so probiotics is still very much in this realm. They've done a lot of great studies. And no matter what or how they look at it, probiotics is good for you.
Yeah, and it's something that my doctor would not say one word about.
But we don't completely know how it works because every time you look at a way it could work, it works that way. So it puts off. I mean, okay, there's a couple of things it doesn't do, but it changes the white blood cell ratios in your body. It tends to inhibit autoimmune responses. Again, particularly having to do with things in the colon, so like Crohn's disease and things like this. Probiotics are going to help a lot with that. For a number of reasons, but one of them is simply giving your body something to chew on instead. It releases enzymes, directly that also have antioxidase things. Bacteria can't handle.
Now, not just any probiotic does this for any person. It's like
it's both and both.
Many
yes, and so they're all good. But the strains are really important. That's what I mean. Like it's like cooking, where every test for any disease shows that almost any group of probiotics is going to help
in some way.
Yeah. But there are really specific ones, and even within that, there's really, really specific ones.
Well, we don't need to do that today.
But that's part of what I was trying to get at, is that our diet is going to change on an hour-to-hour basis. What the bacteria, even given a set of strains that we already have, what those bacteria are doing, the way they're going to be responding to us and us to them, it's going to change everything. The way we digest foods, the way we feel. It's going to change our emotions.
And this combined with fiber.
Well, see, this is sort of what I'm trying to think about is how our microbiome is interacting with us the way, say our liver would, right? So our liver is governing so many things in our body, right? It's filtering our blood. It's dealing with our sugar balance. It's keeping our energy going. It's a major store of fats. Our liver is a command center of our body. Our microbiome is also a command center of our body. It runs the way we are.
Which organ is not a command center? Like each one is a command center.
Right. We don't have extra organs.
Yeah.
yeah. That's what I'm trying to say, is that our microbiome is one of these things.
Right. Okay. Understood now.
And it's not a just sort of thing that's happening within us.
Right. It's not just these little things that are running around. It's a whole system.
It's a whole system like our other ones. Some
Lymph
of them, and some of them are really diffuse, like skin or our pancreas. Like you can't find a pancreas easily. It's sort of like a blob of fat and connective tissue that kind of sits around amongst the viscera, and you're like, I think I see an organ here, but it doesn't look like the way a heart does, or
interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, it's really diffuse. I've been looking at them for years before realizing what I was seeing. Just because I'm like, oh, I guess that thing's the pancreas. It's sort of anyway. So organs are collections of functions as well as collections of cells, and collections of a tissue, together. And that's what the microbiome is. It's a collection of kind of cells all doing something together, and we're responding on a essentially hour by hour, minute by minute basis to our food, and then communicating that with everyone else in our families and in our community. So whatever we're doing to ourselves, that's also happening to everyone else, and vice versa.
What a wonderful way to think about life if we could just internalize that concept. But anyway, please.
Absolutely. No, like, and so, you have to think strongly about, who in your family is taking antibiotics, and realize that this is affecting everyone in your family when that's happening. And don't not take antibiotics. Antibiotics are great for you. But when you do it, understanding that you're taking a serious decision, you want to do it when you really need to, and then you want to do it until everything's dead. And then
don't mess around. Complete the antibiotics.
Complete the antibiotics.
But is there anything that the rest of the family can do to deal with the possible effects?
I would suggest probiotics of really any sort.
So everyone.
Yeah, yogurt. Nothing too extreme. You don't need a fecal suppository or something, but
although I hear they work wonders.
Yeah. It's a good idea to get back to sort of a more balanced microbiome. And the weird thing is what you're putting into you isn't then what becomes your microbiome. It just sort of helps balance it. You don't end up with yogurt inside you living. You end up with something that is a mixed and diverse microbiome, but the yogurt helps it develop.
Although what you were saying about fiber is that fiber will actually change what stays inside you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's not just this mechanical thing. It's also the habitat for much of the microbiome. So if you want a diverse microbiome, make a diverse habitat. So just like, if you just had a pavement, you might have a few things that could live there, but it wouldn't be a lot. Whereas if you have grass and trees and bushes, you've got a lot more diversity.
Broccoli.
Yeah, and so the more things that are going into you that give little nooks and crannies for the bacteria to live on, something that's indigestible that they can sit there and colonize, which will then go, once you have a colonized piece of fiber, that's something else that other bacteria are then going to go and try and eat, because some of those bacteria are working on the fiber and working on the outside. Other parts are going to be able to graze on that. So you have multiple layers of bacteria working together when you have that happening. Now, obviously, any food is going to be somewhat like that, but the fiber works.
Soluble fiber.
All kinds of fiber.
All kinds of fiber.
And you would want a balance. Again, it's a lot of it's about diversity, and the more diversity of bacteria you have inside you, the more resistant you're going to be to other diseases coming in. And again, strangely, not just bacterial diseases. This includes viral diseases. That your immune system begins to understand how to target things better when the bacteria are there. Now, I would not be surprised if we didn't find out that the bacteria are not just sort of passively giving your immune system something to think about, that they're also signaling your immune system and telling it what to do, right? Bacteria don't want to be killed by your immune system.
The communication between the stomach and the brain has to go 2 ways. It can't just
It absolutely goes 2 ways. Yeah. So there's this constant
the
interaction.
And the brain and what you're calling the microbiome within the body. Yeah.
Now, back to the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is super popular these days. People are into like jumping into ice baths and things.
Let's hear it for the vagus nerve.
Yeah, because it creates what's called the vagal response, and that slows your heart rate and slows your breathing, and it's what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. So you've got 2 sides to your nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight one. And the parasympathetic, that's what they call rest and digest. So you can imagine that would be useful for your stomach, right? So it's your vagus nerve is going all over your body, but the key communication is between your stomach and your brain with the vagus nerve. It's almost like a secondary spinal cord, and that there's this direct communication between the two. When your vagus nerve is being stimulated, you rest and digest. So after a meal, you feel sort of tired, and you lie down, and it encourages digestion. And that's a good thing, right? You want to be able to digest. But what has happened to us with our superabundance of food and our superabundance of the kinds of food we like but that are not good for us is we have developed an interaction that causes irritable bowel syndrome. It's really direct. And it starts off by just simply eating too much food. Okay, so that's the first move. So the first move is we're hungry and our bodies are not well evolved for knowing when to stop. It takes a bit for the insulin to climb up and tell you that you're done. It takes a bit for ghrelin to respond to pressure in the stomach telling you you've got enough food.
And all of this is by design.
All of it is so that we gorge as much as possible every time we have the opportunity.
Get it in there before we stop. Yes.
Yeah. So we have an extra supply of fat to keep the brain going, and we'll be fertile. Right? Evolution is all aimed at that. And so while we're eating, we have a tendency to not just eat enough, but to kind of go over the top. And so now we've got a volume problem, and that's where everything starts to go wrong. Now we have too much food inside us. And there's only 2 ways for it to come out. And usually you're not going to throw it up because your body wants to keep on to it. Wants to hold on. So you're going to poop it out. And the more volume there is, the more pressure there's going to be. So then you've got secondary problems and tertiary problems. So let's say you've eaten a bunch of bread. Okay, so a lot of people for a while now have been trying to avoid wheat products. They talk about it because of the gluten, but it's a very small population of the very small percentage of the population that actually have gluten sensitivity. And yet, people avoiding bread seem to get a benefit. And so, assuming that they're not all crazy people, they're actually feeling better and having health improvements by avoiding bread. What's going on? I don't think they need to be as concerned as someone with a real allergy. And I think maybe that is a little bit over the top sometimes. But what happens, first thing is anything, pasta, bread, all of these things, when they go into your stomach, they start to expand. Water starts to get in there and they start to get bigger. The next thing that happens is the carbohydrate, the starch molecules start to unravel, and those hold more water as well. So the volume continues to go up. Then you have all of these very simple carbohydrates that are great food for bacteria. But these bacteria are not necessarily ones that are going to be selecting for slow and careful digestion. These are ones that are like mice in a silo of grain. They're going to expand as quickly as they can. They're going to dedicate themselves to enzymes that break up these carbohydrates, and they're going to just go crazy eating all this stuff. And what are they going to produce? They're going to produce gas. They're going to produce hydrogen and methane and carbon dioxide.
They're the ones that are going in there slicing everything.
They're slicing everything out, yeah. And so the more simple carbohydrates you have, the more of that kind of population you're going to have. And this can be thought of as long-term, right? You could be breeding for this stuff inside yourself and your family. And it can be thought of as short-term. Right now, you have something that's responding immediately to what you just ate, and it's decided to turn on those enzymes rather than other ones.
Every mouthful turns into two.
Something like that. Yeah. And you need more water because you're taking all of the water out of it, so you keep drinking more water. And so this creates even more volume problems. Now, what do? We often combine this with salt, which makes us drink even more water. So I don't tend to think of salt as directly bad for us. Salt is sort of a side issue, but salt definitely sucks water out of our body, so we need to drink more water. If you have dehydration problems, which a lot of us do, so salt is bad in that way, right? My doctor says for my heart, I need to drink more water, so less salt will help my heart. Not because salt is bad for my heart, but because water is good for my heart. Salt is the opposite of water, exactly. But when you eat a salty meal, now you have all that salt in your stomach, you have more water rushing into your stomach, so that increases the volume, and then you drink more water, which also increases the volume. So like you're starting to explode at this point. And this is just a normal meal. So this is why it all goes wrong so quickly. You can see how this happens. So then what do we combine this with? We combine this with a bunch of fat. Now, fat.
If you've eaten steak and potatoes.
Yeah, so the potatoes are doing all of this carbohydrate stuff. The fat in the steak, fat is itself a natural laxative. And so the fat is just greasing everything along, and it's just going to pour through you really, really quickly. So there is. I
mean, considering the pressure, having it pour through you might not be a bad thing.
It might not be a bad thing. You're not going to absorb as much of that fat, but you're going to feel not so great, and you're going to need a bathroom about 15 minutes after eating.
I'm very familiar with all these sensations. Unfortunately, not recently, but
and so there's really simple answers to these things, right? Try and lower the amount of fat in any given meal. Try and have more complex carbohydrates, less just a loaf of bread. Have smaller meals.
Yeah, how about just eat more slowly?
Eating more slowly is going to help. But if you keep eating really slowly for an hour and a half, you're still going to have a lot of food in you.
Right.
But eating slowly helps because then your body is going to notice that you're full.
Exactly. It gives you time.
It gives time for that insulin response, gives time for the ghrelin to respond to the stretch receptors. And those stretch receptors are going to notice. But, all of the other things that are sort of the opposite of eating out at a nice restaurant. Avoiding a stick of butter in every, serving of mashed potatoes.
I want a stick of butter.
I know.
In every serving.
But that's just going to, be greasing you right on through. And the amount of salt they put on as well. I'm so thirsty.
Because it's delicious.
It's delicious, exactly. We evolved on the Serengeti where there was no salt. Right. And we needed it to live. And the only salt we could really get was by eating meat that we, found dried on a bone somewhere. So we really, really like salt, and we seek it out and we associate it with the good flavors of meat.
But we get enough. We don't need to salt our food.
Yeah. In modern society, we get way more than enough.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not against salt in and of itself, but we have to understand what it's doing to us. And it's mostly about the water. And it puts a strain on our kidneys, and it puts a strain on your heart if you don't have enough water, and it's going to basically cause bloating and all of these things that are related. I wanted to get even to more details of some of the diets that are out there to fight irritable bowel syndrome. I don't think are wrong. But I think they're not really understanding sort of the larger picture. So there's the I can't remember the exact initials. There's the NICE diet, NICE, and it's like the FODMAP diet or something.
Yeah, the FODMAP. That's right.
Yeah, FODMAP diet. Now these things start off with no bread. So again, like the anti-gluten people, they have the same idea, and it probably works for some of the same reasons. But they're specifically looking at things that are related to the oligosaccharides. These
the what's?
Short.
Say that word again.
Oligo meaning small, and saccharide sugar.
Oligosaccharides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oligosaccharides. Yeah.
Okay.
These are not quite starches and not quite sugars. They're in between the two.
You mean the chain?
The size of the chain. Yeah. So they're small. They're smaller than a starch, but they're larger than a sugar. And so we don't absorb these things very quickly through our intestine because they're not like glucose, which we just absorb right away. But we can break them down pretty quickly because they're already pretty short and they're relatively easily digested, not just by us, but also by our bacteria. And so we associate these things, again, with gas production. So one of the things that is very commonly associated with the oligosaccharides are the beans. And so beans and gas production are a well-known association.
Musical fruit.
Exactly. And so these are things that are part of the FODMAP diet. These are things you want to avoid.
What is the purpose? Is the FODMAP diet to avoid gas? What is it?
It's all about irritable bowel syndrome.
But what are they trying to do?
They don't really have a thesis. They just decided it was a bunch of things that were really easily digestible by bacteria, and they think it has something to do with the way your intestines work. But there's no double-blind studies on this.
But the idea is that you're eating easily digestible foods.
Well,
is that the idea?
It's hard to say because they have no problem with meat, and they do have a problem with an apple, and so. I don't agree with them.
Okay.
I think that any of the things on the FODMAP diet in excess are going to cause a problem. But that's true of a lot of stuff.
Sure.
If I eat a bucket of apples, I am going to be running to the bathroom. It's clearly not just bread that causes problems.
Too much of anything.
Yeah. So, but the FODMAP diet does not include fats and does not include meat as a part of a problem.
Right.
And I definitely see fatty meat as part of the problem.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm trying to sort of differentiate. Nice diet is also very similar in these ways.
Yeah, so you're going back, and so it used to be that the fats were the problem, and now it's sugars are the problem.
Sugars are the problem, but it's really, you have to think about, again, the ecosystem that you're entering into.
Okay, back to the right.
And
back to the microbiome,
in the FODMAP diet, they're trying to avoid. They actually recommend avoiding some of the fibers,
right,
and seeking out meat
because fibers are hard to digest or indigestible.
Exactly,
right.
And I could see how this would work, right? If you have problems because you poop 15 minutes after eating, putting a bunch of fiber in your diet is not going to slow that rate down.
Okay. I mean, it actually might. It depends.
It might. It depends, exactly. So what I'm saying is that a healthy diet with plenty of fiber in it means that you're not going to be going down this road in the first place. But you can't just take a bacon cheeseburger with fries on the side and pour some fiber on it and think that that's going to like solve your problems. It might actually help a little bit, right, but it's not. Your time to the bathroom is not going to go down.
Right. I mean, maybe if you had broccoli with that burger instead of fries. Or
exactly, yeah. That's going to lower the grease amount, which is also not part of the FODMAP diet, but I think is part of the problem.
Right.
If you lower the amount of grease, if you give your body something more to chew on while you're
making it easy to digest. I mean, I thought I was under the impression that part of what the whole thesis, your thesis, is that what you're trying to do is make everything harder to get at from the body,
harder to get at,
so that the body
slower,
has to work and take time to digest the food,
right,
to get what it needs out of it.
Right.
If it's easier to digest, then everything is immediately available, and those are the problems you're talking about.
Absolutely. So there's a sort of long-term versus short-term. Long-term, a more difficult to digest diet is going to make you feel satisfied for longer because it'll stay in your stomach longer. Mm-hmm. Short-term, you're going to feel hungry because you're not getting any nutrients from it right away. They're taking longer to get to.
What is the FODMAP diet like? What is that prescribed for? Is that for diabetics?
Specifically irritable bowel syndrome.
Oh, it is an irritable bowel syndrome
right
thing.
And there's that one, and there's the nice diet. They're both relatively well studied in that they seem to help, but not well studied in that they've been done double blind, that they exactly looked at all the details.
People do get some relief from these diets. That's why they're a thing.
Right. So if you just picked everything on a FODMAP diet and ate like an onion and an apple and a bunch of bread and a bunch of soft cheeses, you would start and follow it with a glass of milk, that might be hard on your stomach. And you could see how things would be going wrong. Whereas if you instead replace this with, say, rice and some lean meat, that would probably go down pretty easily.
Yeah.
And, you could see how there's a difference between these two things. I just don't think that the entire thesis of the FODMAP diet is right. I think they're not looking at things correctly because they don't include the kind of meat, how much fat you're having. They tend to be on the anti-fiber side. I'm pro apples, right? But, I don't want to eat, again, an entire bushel of apples because I will feel terrible.
Where would you go for IBS?
I would be, a variety of raw foods. But the first, number one, absolutely, and the FODMAP diet agrees with this, smaller meals.
Right, yes.
Smaller meals, right. As you say, more slowly.
Reduce the stress on the body overall.
Right, because it's a volume issue. It's overall a volume issue. Within that, there's some interesting things where the FODMAP people are against things that are really good for you. That I get it. I see why they're saying it. But I think they're long term, they're actually advocating something that is unhealthy. Some of the bacteria that are really good for you are able to live predominantly on fiber, and kinds of fiber that the FODMAP diet is trying to minimize. The kind you get in raw fruits and the cell walls of plants, and these bacteria are producing a number of chemicals, but one is really, really important. It's called butyrate. And butyrate, as far as I can tell, is approaching kind of a fountain of youth effect. And you mentioned your skin got better when you started eating fiber. I think it's related to this in particular. Okay, we need to get into some sciencey science now for just a moment. Okay, so the DNA in each of your cells, your body, is over like a meter long. So to get it into a cell, which is obviously not a meter in size, it has to be balled up and compacted. And it has to get even smaller. It has to get into the nucleus. So it's balled up and compacted in the nucleus. And then to keep sense of it, it tends to be organized into coherent batches, the chromosomes. And each of those coherent batches is itself further condensed into a smaller shape that can sort of hold itself together. And it's not just a tangle, because if it were just a tangle, it would be difficult for the DNA to get copied. There are enzymes that come in and just like copy the DNA. Exactly. So how is it organized so it's really, really tight, but also able to be copied? It's wrapped around protein called histones. And so it's like beads on a string. The string goes around the histones, and it goes to the next one and goes around that histone, and goes to the next one and goes around that histone. So you have little bits of DNA between it, and then the DNA wrapped around the histones. So the stuff that's between the histones is pretty easy to read.
And what is the histone?
It's just a protein.
It's a protein.
It's actually a bunch of proteins together making this whole thing.
Okay.
But it literally looks like a circle. Mm-hmm. And if you look at an electron micrograph, it looks like beads on a string. Mm-hmm. And so it wraps things up really, really tightly this way. And the stuff between the histones, where the DNA is just out there, is easy to read. And the stuff on the histones is kind of difficult to read. And so if you want to slow down the expression of a gene, you wrap it more tightly around your histones. And if you want something to be read, you have to kind of loop it out there. What keeps things tightly wrapped is called acetylation. And so you can actually pass this down from one person to the next. So if you have high levels of acetylation, your offspring can have high levels of acetylation. So this means less DNA replication. This means fewer things made more slowly because you wrap things so tightly. Stress, for example, increases acetylation and can be passed on from generation to generation without affecting the genome itself. It just is affecting the way things are expressed. So this is what's called epigenetics, how things can be passed down outside the genome. And so acetylation is one of the key things. There's other ones as well, but it's one of the key mechanisms.
It would seem that with less DNA exposed, there's less chances for negative outcomes, but it seems like what you're saying is that with less DNA exposed, it seems like that is a negative thing, not a positive thing.
Yes. No, I mean, the DNA would still get broken if something went attacking DNA. So it's not, protected. What we're talking about is something where it's very difficult for it to make things, right? So DNA generally, we're talking about, makes proteins, enzymes, and there's less of that. And definitely something that happens as you age is expression of DNA gets slowed down. So all of the proteins in your body don't work as well. And so we want to do the opposite of acetylation. And so we want deacetylation.
So stress, which makes things wind tightly, actually accelerates the aging of the proteins that your body needs to
all
work.
Over. Yeah. So
you're saying that stress can cause this acetylation to be passed down
it's
through
inheritable.
Generations.
Yeah, generally from the mother, but
stress experienced in life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's terrible.
Terrible, exactly. So yeah, avoid it. So
avoid stress.
So what you want is deacetylation.
Please. Yes, deacetylation.
Okay, and the general rule for enzymes is you just add A's to the thing that it destroys, right? So if you want deacetylation, deacetylase is the one thing you don't want, right? Because deacetylase is going to break the things that cause deacetylation.
Okay.
And so everything's going to be tightly wound.
Right.
So deacetylase is an actual enzyme that you don't want.
Right.
The more of it there is, the more tightly wound the DNA will be.
The more tightly wound you are.
Exactly. Yeah. So you'll respond worse to stress, etc. Bacteria living on carbohydrates, not carbohydrates, on the fiber in your body, there's a particular class of them, make a chemical called butyrate. Butyrate inhibits deacetylase.
Really?
Really. Butyrate will actually keep you younger. So what do I mean by this? So when your skin ages, it has something in it called elastin. Elastin literally is what it sounds like. It's like an elastic band. As that elastin goes, you get wrinkles in your skin because it's not as taut anymore. Same thing with your veins. So it's not just appearances. This is what causes varicose veins, etc. Is the proteins in your veins start to go and you start to leak blood and you get a varicose vein. So all of these effects of aging that are just really bad, blood clots, etc., are directly related to degradation of protein formation. Butyrate fights that, and so the fiber is actually going to help with DNA expression and be anti-aging.
Is this any fiber, or is this particular? Because there's many different. At least there's the soluble and there's the insoluble.
It's diversity of fibers, and it's a class of bacteria that live on them.
Okay.
And so it's.
So like I take psyllium husks at night, and then I take wheat dextrin in the morning.
Yeah, and they're also going to like they're going to like more complex carbohydrates as well.
Broccoli.
These are the things that slowly digest. These are the things that are not designed to cut the carbohydrates really, really quickly.
Broccoli.
Again, but there's a variety of things. And rice, right? Rice is the opposite of irritable bowel syndrome. It doesn't expand in the same way, even though it's a relatively simple carbohydrate. It's going to slow down the throughput. Of the simple starches, I'm not advocating simple starches in general, but of the simple starches, rice would be the one to go for. And brown rice, obviously, better than white rice. But rice in general is going to be the opposite of the breads and the potatoes and all the things that, the Western diet is really dedicated to that make all of these things worse. So, if you're going to eat simple carbohydrates, and we really want to, rice is the direction to go into. Just because the way those carbohydrates work, they're a little bit slower. They don't tend to absorb water, and they don't untangle and make the same starches. Rice starch is a starch, but it doesn't gel as much as wheat starch does.
Thinking about something like a glycemic index, though, the brown rice would be much, much better because white rice does cause a spike.
No, absolutely. And again, the brown rice is going to give you more fiber for these good things to live on.
Yeah.
But you just kept saying broccoli, and I like broccoli, but this is not a show about we all have to eat broccoli. Okay,
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
forgive me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm just saying that there's ways to not eat bread that are not just broccoli. Yeah. But the FODMAP diet has a lot of weird things that it's against. For example, it's against watermelon as well as apples. And watermelon is a ton of fiber. I think watermelon's really good for you. Watermelon has a lot of very easily accessible sugars, which is why it's sweet, but you don't get a ton of them in your body. If you're eating and you're a little bit full, have some watermelon for dessert. It's going to be perfect. It's going to give you a little bit of sugar, so you're going to feel satisfied. It has a very high glycemic index in that you very quickly take the sugar out of it. You're going to get a spike, but the spike is not going to be very long lasting, and it's going to be limited.
You also suggest it after a meal. It's not the first thing that you eat.
Yeah. I mean, there are diets out there that say eat a piece of sugar before a meal so that you actually get the insulin spiked so that you don't feel as hungry. But that's super playing with fire. You're getting all of the problems of the sugars. You're getting that insulin spike. Your body
have a cube of sugar before each meal, and after 6 months, see what your A1C is.
Yeah, it's not going to go out. Exactly, because you're going to start building up insulin resistance. And you're actually going to go down a really bad path.
Yeah.
But after a meal, you have something where the sugar is bound to a whole bunch of other things, like a watermelon, where you get a lot of volume that's no calories, the water. You have a lot of fiber in watermelon. All of those, cell walls of a plant are going to be fiber. And then you have a little bit of really tasty sugar that is going to be appreciated by your body. It's going to make you feel full. And it's you've done a bunch of favors to your body. The FODMAP diet would say don't do this. If you go to a cookout and you have like a quarter of a watermelon and a whole bunch of potato salad and a bacon cheeseburger, and you feel ill, it wasn't the watermelon and the bun on the cheeseburger. That's just what I'm trying to say. Right? There are a bunch of problems with that diet. It was all the carbohydrates in the potato that was really easy to digest. It was all the fat in the burger and the cheese and the bacon. All of those things were going and getting you. You have to think about everything together, and you can't just say, I'm going to eliminate some stuff. It appeals to sort of the Puritan side of our culture when we say we're just going to forbid a bunch of foods. And I'm going to be in control of my life and my body by forbidding these things. And again, it would make you feel better. If you follow these diets, they will actually work. I'm saying that there's a better way, and you don't have to be living in this strict diet if you understand, limiting the amount of bread in your diet, replacing some of it with rice, limiting the amount of potatoes in your diet. None of these diets mention potatoes. Potatoes are a tremendous push on the glycemic index. All of these things also relate to metabolic syndrome, your insulin resistance, etc. And they're directly related to your digestion, which is so important and we don't think enough of. We you get forced to as you get older, but we really need to slow down the amount we eat. As you mentioned, eat it more slowly so you feel have time to feel full, have time for the insulin to go up and tell you you're full, have time for those stretch receptors to respond to all those things starting to expand in your stomach. All of that, that our grandmothers knew is absolutely true, and is definitely something we can think about. But these restrictive diets that a lot of people are on, again, I think they do work because they eliminate bread. And that's really an important factor to it. But if you eat a piece of bread with a healthy meal, you're not going to feel sick. Particularly if you have a slice of whole wheat bread with a tiny bit of butter on it, with a bunch of steamed vegetables, with a tiny bit of meat, and a side of rice, you've had a good meal and you're not going to feel ill. Lactose intolerance doesn't help, right? If you have a glass of milk with a lot of lactose in it, you're going to have that same problem we were talking about. The bacteria are going to start switching from eating sugars to eating the lactose. They're going to produce a lot of gas, and you're going to have that same bloating and the same problems. So it's reasonable to be, careful with your dairy. People suggest hard cheeses versus soft cheeses. Why would that be? Less fats, that same thing. If you're basically greasing your system, you're just pouring the food straight through, and you're going to feel terrible all the time. Also, those fats, those saturated fats in particular that you get with really fatty meat, are associated with cancer and are associated with a whole bunch of other bad outcomes. They're very, very high in calories, etc. So what we know of a healthy diet is healthy for a range of reasons. And it really is the diversity that matters. I don't think you can become healthy by just, as I said, pouring fiber over your bacon cheeseburger or eliminating bread from your diet. Neither of these, single answers is going to do for you. But increasing fiber and reducing bread are going to make you start much healthier. Increasing the amount of complex carbohydrates, as you mentioned, broccoli, is going to be really good for you. But don't avoid apples. Eat an apple. Apples are really good for you. Yes, they have some sugars in them. Your bacteria are going to eat those sugars and produce some gas. But just eat one apple. You can stop there. Eat watermelon. Don't eat a whole watermelon. Yeah. You're not going to feel well. Yeah, all right. So anyway, that was my take-home message. I think we're finishing up, but I just really wanted to think about people talk about mindful eating. This is what I would like to think about mindful eating. Understanding portion size and diversity of foods and what healthy foods are and
why we want what we want.
Yeah.
And that why we want
it's okay to want those things.
Good for us.
Yeah, it's okay to want those things.
It's like my doctor says, he says, sometimes I have a milkshake.
Yeah. You're not going to die, but maybe not every day.
Maybe even less than that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's go have a milkshake. Thank you, Josh. That was fascinating.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Yeah.
All right. Till next time, everyone.